Star Trek, Strange New Ripoffs, Season 1, Episode 9, All Those Who Wander, also known as Aliens. Well, this week on Strange New Ripoffs, obviously, if you've seen Aliens, you know the story.
The thing is, this same writer, Davey Perez, a few episodes ago, he did that episode, Memento Mori, where the first few minutes of the episode, that was the one that ripped off the Deep Space Nine episode, Starship Down. But the first few minutes of that episode, they found this little girl that was attacked by the colony, or a ship that was attacked by the Gorn. It was a colony.
It was a colony.
And her name was Fig. So then we made the connection that the way they played this girl was like Newt on the Aliens movie. So Fig, Newton, that was the joke. So maybe you could argue by the same writer that might have been homage that he was doing. But the same writer went to the well a second time and did Aliens again. So this is not homage. This is ripping off franchises and not giving credit on screen for where they got their ideas from. So anybody who defends this stuff as in, well, there's some common tropes. No, this is Aliens. I know you're going to go through the synopsis, but this episode here was the Aliens movie. It's the same writer that in Memento Mori stole from not only Deep Space Nine, but the first few minutes stole from Aliens as well. They had another little girl that was a survivor from these Gorn/xenomorphs, because I called them xenomorphs back then too, and sure enough, I was right. That's what they turned them into, is xenomorphs from the Aliens franchise. The people behind this production have no originality whatsoever.
No, they do not. In this version of Aliens, there is a downed ship on some ice planet, and they have to go looking for it and recover the ship. Well, they get there, the ship is there, and they're finding dead bodies all over the place. They go in the ship, they watch the captain's log, and they picked up, this other ship had picked up 3 travelers, and apparently one of them is infected with Gorn eggs, and they hatched, hence the massacre of the ship. And all that they find left of the survivors from this ship are a little girl who we will refer to as Fig Newton and an alien who they can't translate his language. Isn't that convenient? As it turns out, this alien whose language they cannot understand, he is infected, and the Gorn hatch. It ends up killing 2 of the crew members. They do eventually defeat these creatures. However, in the process, Hemmer had been oozed on? Gooed? Slimed, I guess. And this is just disgusting because apparently that's how they infect you. I could make a number of disgusting comments about that. I don't need to. I'm sure you can figure it out on your own. So anyways, he's been infected with Gorn eggs, and his answer to that is to commit suicide at the end of the episode. So the only character on this show that I actually enjoyed watching, they have now taken away from me, so there is absolutely nothing left of this god-awful ripoff of a show.
I could not believe they did that. Hemmer, last week, even in that cheesy production they did, I went out of my way in the recording to say, Hemmer, if they just gave this guy better lines, they would have a good character. What do these people do? The one character that they have that they could build on, and old schoolers are like, hey, I could go along with that character. What do? They kill him off. This production company doesn't know what they're doing. They have no idea what they're doing.
No, and it was hilarious because, as we know, this is the SS Feelings, and throughout the episode, you had the older characters, Hemmer, Mabenga, and Pike, giving advice, wisdom, whatever you want to call it, to the younger characters on the show. And it was like the story was written around these pieces of wisdom that they wanted the older characters to pass on to the younger ones. It felt like an inverted storytelling, because usually what would happen would be you would have a story, and the story would basically be your characters reacting to what's going on around them. But in this instance, the events going on around them were secondary to the wisdom that this writer, and I use that term loosely, wanted to impart upon the audience by way of having the older characters impart this wisdom to the younger ones. It was really bizarre. I mean, it was written like an after-school special, if you're familiar with those things back in the late 80s and early 90s. I guess they go back further than that, but those are the ones I'm familiar with. But yeah, this is like Horror meets after school special. Oh my god, what do you even say about that? I mean, who would even think to do such a thing? I'm gonna rip off Aliens and turn it into an after school special. What the hell is that?
The George Samuel Kirk character in this episode was Hudson from Aliens. Game over, man, game over. Yeah, you know the line. He didn't say that line, but he played the character just like Hudson was in Aliens.
Well, that was the gist of it, yeah.
And Discount Drummer, she was the Ripley character, and the little girl was Newt. Oh my gosh, this was such a bad ripoff of Aliens. You know, they went after Ursula Le Guin, then you find out that they ripped her off the second time, because the first time they ripped off, they gave her... Their version of credit was to name a starship after her that the estate found out about through like third-hand means. So there were lots of people after our review that were pointing out, no, they gave credit to Ursula Le Guin's estate. It's like, no, they didn't. They named a ship after her in that episode of Discovery. That's where they first used her. And then in Strange New Worlds, when they redid it again and we were complaining about it, there were some people that were coming at us saying in our comments, no, they gave credit. It's like, no, what they gave credit for was that Discovery episode. That interview you saw with Kurtzman was for the Discovery episode.
Yeah, and that Discovery episode, I must say, they did a better job of ripping off Le Guin, if indeed they actually did use her story as inspiration, because that was so loosely based on that story that one I can actually let that go. Because that, as much as I hate Discovery and thought that episode was absolutely stupid, at least they did it in such a way that it didn't appear to be a ripoff of Ursula Le Guin's story. Now, in Strange New Worlds, that was very obviously a ripoff of the same story.
The same short story.
Yeah, and in this instance, with Strange New Worlds, the way that they went about doing it, it's like they got some confidence going there because they'd gotten away with the first time, which, you know, that's how you do inspiration. That was not a ripoff. They just were inspired by this notion of a child being responsible for a massive amount of destruction.
You mean the Discovery take?
Yes, the Discovery episode. Yes, sorry, I should have been clearer there. But then, when they used that same story in Strange New Worlds, I mean, they only changed a couple of things, and it wasn't enough to make it their own. It was just enough to wreck the original story and make it stupid, but it wasn't enough to make it unrecognizable as the original.
Well, that's what they did here. In Memento Mori, in the first few minutes, when he had that Fig Newton, you could argue that was a little bit of homage, and you wouldn't have to give credit, just homage. Mm-hmm. But then, much like they did with Ursula Le Guin, they came and they did it a second time, except they did it larger the second time.
Yeah.
Because this one is not homage. This is stealing. This is stealing the Aliens movie from 1986.
Yeah.
Yes, they moved a few chairs around on the deck, but it's the Aliens movie from 1986.
Yeah.
There's even direct character mappings, like I mentioned with George Samuel Kirk as being Hudson. I don't know how anybody can watch this franchise and not be embarrassed. This is not common tropes. This is not, all the ideas have ever been done, which, by the way, I don't believe in, but some people say that. This show is called Strange New Worlds. When are you going to give us new things? At least last week with the cheese and that story, at least it was different for me. It didn't feel like they were ripping off one particular thing.
Well, I feel vindicated because people were giving me shit because I said that was the best episode of the season. Well, after watching this week's episode, what do you guys think? Was last week's better than this shit? Because I think it was. But again, that's an indictment of the show and the writing on this show, that the one episode that was a fairy tale, which wasn't like a Star Trek episode. It wasn't them exploring. It wasn't them being their usual characters. This was something else. That was better than all the rest of the episodes combined for the entire season.
And then there's people in our comments that
Still not good, though. Just want to make sure everybody knows that.
Yeah,
but it's the cheese. If you enjoy the cheese factor, and you enjoy the exposing of the fact that these characters are... It's the writing of these characters that really makes the show terrible. It's the stories that make it terrible. Because last week's episode, that fairy tale episode, it showed that these actors can really act other characters that aren't as horrible and disgusting as what they're asked to do every week in the rest of the season. So to me, that exposed something about the writing being the root of all the problems with this show. Sorry, please continue.
Well, the people after that review last week, the endorsement of the episode, I do not think that we communicated well why we were endorsing it, because people were getting upset. Oh, you thought this was a good episode.
No!
It's like, did you watch the review? What we said is this was a watchable episode because it wasn't Star Trek. They weren't even trying to make Star Trek even their own weird version of it. It was this fanciful place. Now, was it well done? No, it was cheesily done, but it was watchable. It was a Mystery Science Theater watchable.
Yeah.
If you think that means that our review says that we think that was a great episode, I don't know what to tell you. That is not at all what we said in that review. We said this was the best of what they made this season, but it's still not that good. Read into that what that actually means. If that's the best that was made, what does that say about these other episodes they're making?
They're horrible.
Correct. That was so frustrating when there were people that were getting upset with us because they thought that we were, oh, you're saying this is great Star Trek. It's like, no, we're not. We know we're in there. In fact, several times we said, but this is not good Star Trek. We said that in the video.
Well, I think the thing is that I think people were upset because they can tell that was still not good Star Trek.
It wasn't.
And they expected us to just say, that's not good Star Trek, which we did. However, we do give credit where credit is due. As far as a guilty pleasure cheese fest, like watching something that you know is terrible, but enjoying it anyway because it tickles some funny bone down inside of you that you know it's terrible, but it amuses you anyway. It's like if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy and that show on there, Ow, my balls. Like, people would sit there and laugh at some guy getting kicked in the nuts over and over and over again. I mean, it's obvious that that's bad television, but there's something about it that makes you laugh anyway. That's what this was. This was their version of Ow, my balls.
So that was our review last week. This week, this supports our review from last week because they go back to their same thieving ways.
Yeah, there's nothing positive to say about this
is
episode.
Not only not good Star Trek, this is not good television.
No, this is borderline plagiarism.
Yeah.
For instance, when you think about it, like James Cameron, he also made Terminator, and he was sued by Harlan Ellison for ripping off an episode of...
2 episodes.
Oh, 2 episodes of, what was it, The Outer Limits?
Yeah, Soldier and Demon with the Glass Hand.
Yes. Yeah, so James Cameron got sued for ripping off Harlan Ellison for the Terminator story. And in this instance, I could see where James Cameron would be very angry with the makers of Star Trek Strange New Worlds for ripping off his Aliens.
There's no sense in even going into, like, there were some minute story differences that we could talk about. There's no point. This was a wasted episode. They killed off Hemmer, and they stole the Aliens plot.
Yeah, and there are only 2 more things I want to cover about this episode. Number 1, the writer on this episode, Davey Perez, it was pointed out to me in an article where he was interviewed apparently, and what he said about bringing his own spin to the Gorn using his own headcanon. That's not how you play in someone else's sandbox. I don't work in the industry, but I've taken a number of classes. In fact, one of the workshops I went to was called Playing in Someone Else's Sandbox, and there was somebody there from the Star Trek novels, a writer from the novels, and it was discussed that you have to be mindful of what you're doing when you're playing in someone else's sandbox. And this Davey Perez does not understand that. You don't get to just go into a franchise, take something that's well established, and decide to just put your own spin on it because you want to. You don't get to go in there and just put your mark on everything. I mean, like a dog lifting his leg and just pissing on everything, it's now his. Well, you're playing in somebody else's sandbox.
Later in that same article, the author of the article said something like, well, yeah, because they were reviewing like this episode. And, well, this episode, you have to kind of expect that because as they try to build out the Star Trek universe, they're going to have to do these sort of things. That is so false. There was no reason. This show is called Strange New Worlds. If you can't build on the Gorn like they were established, go to a new world, build a new race. You can do your own thing. That was a completely false statement in that article that said that they had to do that. They didn't have to do that.
Yeah, because when you write for a franchise that is as old as something like Star Trek or even Doctor Who, because I'm just going to bring that into it here for a moment as well. You are playing with someone else's toys. You don't get to just decide to change something because you want to. You are the current caretaker of this franchise. It is up to you to take care of it, to maintain it, to make sure that it isn't ruined. You're supposed to be looking out for it, not pissing all over it.
The Gorn are not xenomorphs from Aliens. They're not. They're not xenomorphs. The Gorn are not xenomorphs.
But this also really hits home that this is not the same timeline.
You're right. This episode establishes, and with that interview with Davy Perez, it establishes that this is not in the same continuity as original Trek.
Certainly not.
It's not. It can't be. There's no way. He just admitted that it's not. He played around with something in his head canon to make it work. He's like, well, that's why in Arena, why Kirk was so surprised that the Gorn were like that, because it was nothing like he encountered before, what he expected with the Gorn. And I read that, I'm like, what are you talking about? In the Arena, he didn't know what the Gorn were, period. Yeah. Not in this form. That's just bullcrap.
Yep.
They're not xenomorphs. The Gorn, as established in the original Trek continuity, are not xenomorphs. They're just not. If you wanted to make a xenomorph, you could have made up your own alien type. In fact, that's the new part of Strange New Worlds.
Yep. Yeah, and by being Strange New Worlds, I mean, you could have come up with something else, a new race, that we never see again, at least in the previous continuity. Because, you know, you could just say that, well, they were out there exploring this region, and they never go back there again. Easy peasy. But no, they had to go and screw with the Gorn.
This episode on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the greatest thing ever, this thing is a 1. If I could give it a 0, I'd give it a 0, but I'm giving it a 1.
Well, I have one last thing I want to say about this episode. This has to do with the Hemmer character. As we know, the actor who plays Hemmer, or played Hemmer, is actually a blind actor. They killed him off in this episode. This just goes back to what I said about Star Trek Discovery, how they would use disabled actors, like onesie, twosie, or as background, and then they disappear. Granted, Hemmer had a larger role this season.
He had a name, at least, unlike the guy in Discovery who was in the background. I don't even know his name.
The guy who rolled around in the wheelchair in the background.
I don't even think he had a name.
Yeah, but there was that one episode where they had the guy that was on Jericho, who is now wheelchair bound. But again, it was a onesie, twosie. They weren't given a proper role throughout the season as a main character. At least Hemmer had some of that. He was in several episodes this season, but now they've killed him off, and he's gone.
They should have built more on Hemmer. Hemmer could have been their gateway to bring in older fans.
Yes.
Because I was like, if they build more with Hemmer, I might be able to be talked into doing something here. They got rid of him, like the one character that could have been my gateway into this crappy new franchise, and they killed him off.
Yeah. The interview that I read with the actor who plays Hemmer, it did say that apparently, well, allegedly, he is going to be brought on in other capacities. I don't know if he's going to be appearing on Discovery in the future or Picard or who knows what. Clearly, he won't be back as Hemmer unless they bring him back as some sort of Force ghost and decide to rip off Star Wars. But
oh God, I hadn't thought of that.
Oh, why not?
He could
rip off everything else.
He could be like the Force ghost talking to Uhura. He's like Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan.
Yeah. Oh, God. You know, but like you said, he was the one character on this show that actually gave me a little bit of hope, because the actor himself is only like in his late 30s, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. And it's sad that you have to say that that's one of the older characters on the show, one of the older actors on the show, which really tells you something about their target market. He was one of the few characters that I could actually sit and watch and listen to. Life experience could give you something to relate to as an older person, even though I really don't consider middle-aged to be older.
He took crappy lines and made them at least, you could sit and listen to them.
Yeah.
Even though they were crappy lines. That's how you know he was a decent actor. Still is, but I mean, his character's gone now. Between that and what they did in this episode, I mean, why couldn't they kill off Discount Drummer or Nurse Chapel? Those two characters I could do without and not have any problem with.
Nurse Chapel you can't kill because they still try to pretend like this is,
they'll clone her later. They'll just, before the series is over, just clone her, bring her back.
She's just a clone.
What you see in TOS is a clone of Nurse Chapel.
I know. They find a mushroom patch and bring her back.
Yep.
Just like the Doctor on Discovery.
They get in that hidden spore drive that Spock knows about.
Yeah.
And Spock builds one because he's so distraught about Nurse Chapel dying.
Yeah, because he's so in love love with her.
Exactly. So he builds a mushroom drive. And by the way, they did do some of that love crap in there too. Love triangle crap.
Yeah, I guess that's one. I guess I take that back. There is one more thing I want to say about this episode, because Spock, they had Spock tapping into his human aggression or some shit.
Roid rage.
And then at the end, he can't control it. And it's just like, oh God, why are we even going there?
He was roid
It was
raging.
horrible.
Because Nurse Chapel told him, well, maybe you need to learn how to get angry or some stupidity like that. So then he saw Spock. And it reminded me of like Hulk Hogan back when he was in the ring. You know how he'd start shaking real bad and then he'd go all nuts? That's what Spock was doing. He'd start shaking his hands and he was going all Hulk Hogan-y. This was stupid. Stupid.
Yeah. And then my mom, who watched the original series when it first aired back when she was in high school, and she's watching this and she's like, that's not Spock. It was great.
I mean, the stupidity on that was like a 9.8, and that's going to be an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
By the way, it's an ongoing thing, but this is an episodic series, just so we're aware.
No, it's not.
They're saying this is going to be an episodic thing, but this aggression thing that Spock's tapped into, this is now at the end of the episode. They let us to believe it's going to continue on through the series. So this is not an episodic series. And this stupidity, because we almost forgot to talk about it, because everything else was just
so stupid.
This was stupid. I mean, I wish I could take the 1 and give it a 0, because that's how bad this episode was.
-500.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would love to hear everybody else's comments on this. You know, what do you think of this episode? What do you now think of the previous week's episode, the Elysian Kingdom? What are your thoughts on them killing off Hemmer? Did you even care? And I certainly, I mean, what they're doing to Spock, yeah, it's a bad one. So anyway, love to hear your thoughts on this, and like, subscribe, comment, and thanks for listening.
Take care.